Welcome to KidneyCAN's Making the Most of More Time Town Hall. I want to thank the audience. We have 160 registrants for tonight's town hall. This town hall video will be available on our YouTube channel in just the next couple of days. Especially thank you to the sponsors who made this possible: BMS, ASI, Exelexis, Genentech, and Merck. Now I want to thank our moderator, Dr. Evan Hall from Fred Hutch Cancer Center, and our panelists, Adam Stern, Laura S. Feller, and Brian Lewis. I'll hand that over.
Great. Thank you, Susan. This is really an honor to be here, to be invited to moderate today's panel. I want to thank KidneyCAN for the invitation and our panelists for volunteering their time and sharing their stories with us. I am a medical oncologist, and I treat kidney cancer and skin cancer at Fred Hutch Cancer Center in Seattle, Washington. I think that I guess we're trying to introduce ourselves as a bit of a humanistic element today. It's really the focus of this talk is about the rest of lives beyond cancer, or in addition to cancer. And so this is my family. We're on a winter hike up in the Cascades. My 17-month-old daughter, she was a little younger then, was asleep. She was missing the beautiful views. But I'm interested in, I have some other interests besides medicine, which are listed. And I'm really interested in the topics that we're going to talk about today, which is, living with advanced cancer. How do you maximize that? What does that look like? What are the challenges to that situation, which are often different than those that arise right after diagnosis? Life goes on after a cancer diagnosis. I think we're going to hear that from our panels today. And this could be personal and emotional. And so I just want to invite everyone that, this could make people feel tearful, sad, angry. This could bring up some emotions in the panelists and the participants. And so really wanting to create a safe and supportive environment. If a panelist needs to take a moment to regroup or turn off their camera briefly, that's totally fine. We can move on and ask a panelist a different question to another panelist. But this is pretty personal content and a little different than just talking about the different treatment options and such. As we care for patients throughout their kidney cancer diagnosis and different elements of their treatment, we often spend a lot of time after the dust settles talking about life things. Should I go back to work? Should I retire? Should I go back to school to pursue a different career? These are things that come up in clinic and things we're going to be talking about today. So I'm really excited to be a part of this unique program. And want to thank our panelists for being willing to share their stories and their experiences. I think we have a lot to learn. I'm looking forward to learning from the panel today. And lastly, I'd like to thank the attendees who've logged in to spend time with us today and hear these stories. So with that, I'm going to get started. We're going to kind of introduce everyone on the fly as we ask them their first question. So we'll learn to get a chance to see a little bit about them. So the first question is to Adam, and I'd like to ask Adam how your diagnosis impacted how you think about the future, and how that has evolved in the years since your original diagnosis.
Thank you, Dr. Hall. And thank you to all of the organizers of this event. I think it's a really important topic and an important question, because when folks are first diagnosed, it's really a shock and feels very binary. I know for me, it was this idea of, am I going to survive this or am I not going to survive this? It's a yes or no. It's, and if no, well, there goes the rest of your life, your career, your family, everything that you aspire to. And so, the longer that you live with the disease, and really any disease that is approaching what I think kidney cancer is, which is something that's able to be managed for longer periods of time than we ever knew, 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. Every year seems to change the prognosis. The longer that I live with this disease, the longer that I have had to form sort of two different identities about it. One is the one that still has that angst, how's it going to go, all the fears that come along with that. What's my next scan going to show? What will, it's with me all the time, in the morning, at night. And then there's the other life. It's almost like two separate lives that only interact a little bit. And that's the life that I have, which is very full and rich, with my family, with my work, with my artistic endeavors, projects, things that bring joy, things that I leaned into that, frankly, before the diagnosis, I may never have been brave enough to do. So in some strange way, it's changed a lot of how I pursue different aspects of my life.
Wow, there's a lot to come back to there. I took a few notes and things I'd like to follow up you with. Thank you for that response. The next question is to Laura. How, and this maybe relates to some of what Adam mentioned, how have you handled the challenge of continuing elements of your pre-cancer life, things like work, family, with cancer-related care, the logistics, the scans, the treatment, the visits, the anxiety related to those things, and how has this changed from when you were diagnosed to now?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Hall. I think for me, it's changed quite a bit. I was diagnosed stage 4 in 2016, and I actually was fortunate enough. My employer at the time had granted me 5.5 months of medical leave, which I'm still incredibly grateful for. And then, I go back to work. Once I realized that my clinical trial, I was having at least somewhat of a positive response. And my oncologist at the time really encouraged me to go back to work because he knew that I derive a lot of personal passion from it. I'm a marketing director currently in the hospitality casino industry, and I'm lucky enough that I enjoy what I do. And it was driving me crazy to just stay home and not be working. And so, for me, as things have changed, and I'm not going to appointments every week or every other week now, and I have a little bit more gaps in between my appointments now. I find it a lot easier, but there's still that disconnect at times, right? I've actually changed jobs twice since my initial diagnosis. And it wasn't until recently when another patient that I'm close to inspired me to be open publicly about my diagnosis, that a lot of people at work didn't even know that I, had a cancer diagnosis and I'm a cancer survivor. And so it was, I would disappear for a doctor's appointment and they had no idea that I have gone through everything I have, medically speaking. So there's definitely a balance and a juggle that happens. Fortunately now my scans are every 4 to 6 months, so there's a little bit more normalcy in between. But I would be lying if I said that there's not still anxiety that comes up every time that I have a scan. I distinctly remember I went to a really difficult appointment a few years ago where I was already in ED, but we weren't quite sure what was looking up ahead. And my oncologist at the time went into pretty extensive detail of, he thought that I was going to have a recurrence and what it would look like. And I got back to work. I went on my lunch break. I got back to work. I'm sitting in this media planning meeting for pool season. I was working in Vegas at the time. Pool season is a big deal there. And I'm thinking, is this really what I'm going to spend whatever time I have left doing? This is what I'm going to spend it on. But, honestly, I'm glad. I don't think I could handle staying at home. And so I'm really glad that I'm fortunate enough to have this response.
Great. Thank you. Also come back to a few things you said there. I think those are very interesting and insightful. Next question is to Brian. Brian, how would you describe your mindset kind of shortly after your diagnosis of cancer in terms of treatment and immediate future focused versus thinking about the long term and what this means for your long-term future? And then over the next several years, how did that change in terms of how your general mindset was and focus, if you will?
Sure, and thank you, Evan. Great comments already from Laura and from Adam. I think, and I've said this before, I think many of us go through what I call like a white noise period after diagnosis, where you only hear pieces of occasional conversations because you're so distracted with everything that's going on and the thousands of questions that dash across your head around mortality and your future. But I think, to be honest, it does change over time. And as you sort of go day by day, you build some momentum, some strength from making it through early on. You can build on that. I to be honest, after radical nephrectomy, I heard from a number of people, go find out from other people what's going on. So that was, I spent the next couple of months hunting for other information, trying to track down experts and get second opinions. Subsequent to, second surgeries and later, I think maybe Laura did and maybe Adam, you want to block it out as much as possible at times. And I, like Adam said, put on like the cancer guy over here, and then I need to shut him down. And now I'm back to the Brian guy. And that's something that I think we all sort of struggle with, trying to, maybe not struggle with, just have to deal with. I hope that sort of answers it. It's changed over time, now in a different place than back then.
Yeah, well, that's very interesting. And actually, I'm going to take something you said there, maybe to ask the next question, and I'll have this one come back to you, Brian. I think I heard each of you maybe reference that at the beginning, there's so much, it's a flood of emotions, all these thoughts, it's kind of a whirlwind, for lack of a better word. That's what I'm coming up with now. And then that tends to settle out, but you're still trying to identify the best treatments, make sure that you understand and gather all the information you need. How do you balance that, where you're wanting to stay up to date and make sure that you have all the best information and have sought out the best expertise, but then also kind of go back to being Brian, as you said, and have periods of time where you're able to not unplug, but at least refocus on non-cancer related topics? How did that work for you?
Yeah, I'll answer, and it might not be fully appropriate to this current season. At my time in 2007, there was pretty limited options. There was IL-2, and Sutin had just come out, and the majority of folks that I was talking to was like, Sutin is your way. That's your chance. And my story unfolds with my what I call my cowboy surgeon out at the NIH. We went a different path. So I didn't have multiple choices like you folks do today, where there's multiple combinations. I was pretty limited, and with young kids, my wife was like, "Let's go get it," and we did.
Right.
Can I add on to that? Because
Sure.
I think, Brian, what one thing that you're reminding me of is that having young kids sometimes, and more broadly, just having a really busy life, having a full life in whatever way that is meaningful to you, is almost the best antidote to that feeling of needing a respite, because when you're flowing, when you're in it when I'm on the floor wrestling with my boys, that's one of the only times I'm not at all thinking about this stuff. And that's a very powerful thing.
I like how you phrased that having a full life may be the best antidote to, I don't know if I'm not thinking of a better way than maybe overdoing it, but there's so much information and so many, cancer centers and conferences, and there's really, you could spend 40 to 50 hours a week assimilating the latest stuff. And that's probably not sustainable over a months and years long endeavor, and probably not the best way to find balance. I think that was really nice. Laura, I wanted to come back to you. You mentioned that although things became more normal as things went along, that scan-related anxiety is something that maybe you kind of, I think you might have used the present tense, maybe something that still kicks up some feelings. I hear this a lot from my own patients who are in a more stable position after beginning cancer treatment, that the scans really bring on a flood of emotions, usually worry about what happens if things are not behaving. How do you experience scans now? And is there any advice or tips that you found that help you deal with the anxiety that comes with cancer assessments and scans?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll be honest, I had anxiety even before my diagnosis. It's something I think it's the perfectionist tendencies in me, something I've juggled with for most of my life. Um, Cancer certainly did not help that by any stretch of the imagination. For me, it has gotten easier as I have gotten further along, to where it's not crippling anxiety by any stretch of the imagination anymore. Um, but I think for me, it's because I stopped Cabometyx back in 2020, and thankfully I've still been in ED even after stopping treatment. But it's almost like because I'm not taking that pill every day anymore, like that pill every day was kind of my reminder of what I've been through. And now it's the scans. So it's that scans that remind me that even though I am much more than Laura, the cancer patient, I'm Laura, the cancer patient is still there, right? And that's not going away. I'm okay with that now, but it took me a bit to be okay with that I'm not going to be pre-cancer Laura ever again. I happen to quite like post-cancer Laura actually, so it's a good thing. But I mean, it's still I get anxious whenever it comes time for scans because I know that I told a friend of mine recently, I live my life in 6-month intervals now because I know that unfortunately every scan, could bring different news. But the good thing is that there's so many more options than there were whenever I was diagnosed. So, I take a lot of comfort in that and knowing that whenever I was diagnosed, there was no standard of care for papillary patients. And now because of the trial I was on, there is, and there's more to come. So I feel a lot better about it now. But as far as how do I get through it, this is going to sound really cheesy, but I have a few songs in my playlist that I listen to as I'm driving to my appointment that just kind of get me pumped up and like, all right, you can handle this. I try to remember that too. I've been through the worst. I've hit rock bottom. I got through that. God forbid it comes again for me. I have even more tools now than I did before.
I think that's very insightful and great practical advice. I think a lot of what we're going to talk about today is emotional and hard, but what a useful piece of advice that there's just some songs that make you feel a little better, and you can turn those on and reliably feel a little more at ease, or just at least reflect upon the good association that song has had with you in the past. What a nice kind of takeaway or kind of tip from the piece of advice. One question that we've had from the audience that's come in is, regarding treatment status, and maybe the way to frame this question is when you're on active treatment, say medical therapy or going through a course of radiation or having a surgery or an ablation, how do the challenges that this presents emotionally differ than when you're on a period between treatments, maybe where you're just on surveillance? So maybe Adam, I'll have you start by addressing that, and then we'll let Brian and Laura add in if they have other comments.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's a great deal of overlap between those two versions of anxiety, right? So, I do like to think of uncertainty as the fuel of anxiety in my work as a psychiatrist, and it's the kind of thing that, having a cancer diagnosis is a ton of uncertainty right off the bat. Whether you're on treatment or off treatment, you're always wondering what's that sensation I'm having? What's that physical experience? What will that scan show? And the uncertainty, about worrying what will happen is something that you deal with, that you have to, you don't grow comfortable with it, but you grow accustomed to it being a part of your life. And similarly, rumination about thinking back, did I make the right decisions? Is this the right treatment choice? I know we decided it was, but looking back, would I have done things differently? You can do that with your entire life, going back a few decades. What would I have done differently? So, one thing that I would impart to anyone listening, frankly, is that we think of anxiety as being an enemy, right? Something that we have to figure out how to minimize. But in fact, most of the time, it's serving some function for you. And one of the ways of coexisting with it is letting it wash over you and functioning as best you can, right? And so for Laura, it sounds like that takes the form of listening to music to get through that period, knowing that music will be in some way calming. And for me, when my anxiety really peaks right before scans, and right, the worst of it is after the scan before it's been read. For me, there's no worse time period in my life. I'd rather be in the OR under on anesthesia than have that period of my life. Those hours to days when you're waiting for the results. Knowing this is temporary. The feeling I'm having is temporary. This will pass. Even when it's bad news, I always feel better once there's a plan or there's a result that I know there will be a plan. And so those are just a few things that come to mind when you ask that question.
Oh, Brian, Laura, any comments to build on that?
Yeah, I hesitate to go after Adam with such a great, response, but I would just say I totally agree. I think for me, actually, weirdly enough, my anxiety kicked in a bit more after I stopped Cabo, just because for some reason, like Cabo was my security blanket, and it took a while for me to be comfortable with being off of treatment. Now I like I said, I feel like I'm doing better with it, but it comes and goes. And I just really encourage people to not beat themselves up. I think I did a bit of that in the beginning, where I thought, oh, after I hit NED, I should be grateful. I shouldn't be anxious. I should be feeling good about things. And there are times where I just have to embrace, I don't feel good about it. And that's okay. We don't all need to be the spokesperson for, the cancer survivor that's just loving life and living life all the time. It's okay to embrace that we have those not so great days.
Great. Brian, do you have anything you'd like to add on that?
Yeah, I don't really. I mean, I was fortunate that I didn't have to go on to therapy, so it's hard for me to, really add much. There is a piece of what happened in my circumstance that I a little bit reluctantly share, which is, I grew up in a house of faith with my dad, and so I had a lot of prayer support. My mom lived to be 103, and I felt like I got some of those genes in me, and that was going to help me get through it.
I think what I'd like to talk about support, and you mentioned prayer as a source of support that you found helpful. When I get to a question in the chat that deals with kind of the role of online support, which I want to come back to that, but I'd like to start out by maybe asking Laura, if you would, how the diagnosis impacted your most close layer of support, be that family, very close friends. How did that impact your relationships, maybe in ways positive or potentially less positive? And then how, as your treatment course has unfolded, how have those relationships been what's been supported to you by those relationships? Not sure I said that perfectly, but hopefully you get the gist of it.
You did. And I'm going to try to put this in a quick soundbite. I was really fortunate that I still have some amazing family and friends that, immediately stepped around me, surrounded me and said, all right, we're going to get you through this. I think what's hard whenever you're diagnosed, especially at a younger age, like I was, and like Adam, I'm sure can probably relate to this as well, is it often reminds your close friends of their own mortality. And that can be challenging for them to deal with, right? We often think about cancer being something that impacts older populations, which is often true. But the reality is that we all are, at risk of something like this happening. And it was hard to be that visual reminder to some of my close friends that, hey, this happened to me, it could happen to you too. Whenever I was diagnosed, my kids were in middle school. I was busy, had a full-time job, was busy being a wife and mom, and all of those things. And I think that everyone would agree in my life that I was the primary, bus driver, if you will, right? I was the one keeping us all on driving down the road without the wheels falling off. And so it was adjustment for everyone in my life whenever I got sick, because suddenly I couldn't be the one going to the parent teacher conferences, bringing the kids to the doctor, managing things at work and all, right. And so it was an adjustment period. I'm not gonna lie, it was an adjustment period for everyone in my life. I think that in a weird way, and I hate that it happened this way, but I think it made my kids see things in a different perspective, I hate that, again, I hate that it happened that way, but my kids, really stepped up and were just absolutely incredible and getting us all through it. And I think it's changed over time, to answer your question. Now there's a lot of people in my life that I'm close to that didn't know me whenever I was diagnosed in 2016. And so there's a tendency sometimes to be like, oh, well, you're fine now, right? Well, yeah, relatively speaking, I don't know if I'll ever be fine, and so I think it goes back to what I struggled with in the beginning. Whenever I was diagnosed, in my mind, I had a hard time wrapping my head around the fact that I was stage 4. And I just thought, okay, I'm gonna have surgery and I'll go back to work and that'll be it. And then that's it. Bad chapter of my life gone. It took me a while to realize that this is really a marathon and not a sprint. And so I think it's something that you just continually have to educate people in your life. Hey, yeah, I'm in ED now, but you know what? I still have regular appointments. I have side effects from the treatment I was on that I'm managing. And luckily I have, like I said, a really great support system, but it took some time because it really threw us all for a loop.
So maybe I'm going to ask Adam a follow-up. So I've sometimes heard people refer to support as like layers of an onion. So you have like your really, really close people in the middle, and then but there's other layers of your life. There might be work acquaintances or other people you work with. And this maybe ties into what I heard from both Adam and Laura about almost kind of the dichotomy of the two lives. There's the cancer life, which you're going through and maybe is shared by very few people in the innermost circle, the nuances of that. And then how do you interact with the outer layers of the onion, the people that aren't your best friends or family, who, maybe you don't want to tell everything about or give it regular status updates to. How did you approach that and kind of deciding what you wanted to share with that group and what you didn't want to share?
Yeah, well, I hear that question, but I'm reflecting back on something Laura said about other people's readiness to engage around those topics, right? And so there's an enormous stigma around the idea of cancer. It's too heavy for a lot of people. I'm sure everyone, on the call and certainly a lot of folks who are listening in have experienced, people that they never would have expected to be great supports emerge, and also the opposite, people who they felt like, oh, I thought we were friends, but they actually it was too much for them and they've disappeared, that kind of a thing. And so it's a challenging one thing that I want to say is that something I've come to appreciate is sometimes it's okay to let the ball pass by without taking a swing at it. So for example, I was recently, this is back in January, I got a bunch of my college friends together. We went down to on a beach vacation to celebrate that I had survived 5 years with this disease. It was a milestone, and it was a wonderful experience and a wonderful trip. There's one moment during that trip where we were at a big table for dinner, and people were talking with strangers, and they said, well, what are you guys doing here? A bunch of guys down in the Dominican Republic at a resort. What's this about? And my friend said, oh, we're celebrating his recovery from cancer. And it's just this little moment. It was well-meaning. It was said with love, and it didn't sit right with me. And I knew I could have said, oh, well, I'm going to have this for the rest of my life. Recovery is a weird word for me. But on the other hand, that was just a moment that you just let that pitch pass. It doesn't cost you anything, to let people engage with you around this at the level that they're ready for. So that's one lesson I've learned over the years.
That's really, thank you for sharing that. I keep thinking about that because that's really interesting in the context of that. Everything you said made a lot of sense. I'm gonna keep ruminating on that. I want to shift to one of the questions from the audience about seeking out support from others who have gone through this as well. So instead of maybe your pre-cancer close people who are learning as you are how to deal with this and trying to get up to speed and support you, seeking out the experience of other patients. I know the kidney cancer patient community is very involved online. They're very connected, one of the more active cancer communities for online communities. Have any of the panelists been involved in online support groups? And if so, if they wouldn't mind sharing how they got to that, how they kind of came across that, and what that provided to you that maybe you were looking for at that point.
Can I jump in with this one, even though I was just the last person speaking? I wore this, someone, when I was first diagnosed, I don't remember the name of the person who gave this pin to me, but it says, "I am a smart patient." And it is a site for patients like us. And actually, I think Brian's been on it, Laura's been on it. A lot of people in the that are listening in are heard about this event through Smart Patients. I am a physician, but I was blown away when I was first diagnosed. It took me some months before I had the, I don't know, courage or what, to log on and see what this community was like. But once I did, and I realized there had been people that are further down the road that had lived experiences. There are people that have been on all these different medications, some of which I've now been on, some of which I have not. Maybe I'll hopefully never be on. There's so much, a wealth of experience tied together with warmth, tied together with knowledge, and also it's a moderated kind of a thing. So there's not a lot of noise. There's no tolerance for like misinformation. That all of those facets to me are super important. And I have nothing to do with the website besides being a participant, but I found it immensely helpful and rewarding.
Yeah, I can only say the same thing. It's a wonderful resource. Please go there if you haven't been.
Yeah, I third that. For me, one of the best gifts that a friend of mine who is actually a lymphoma survivor gave me whenever I was diagnosed was she connected me with two patients who were in their 30s who had kidney cancer. And it's so great to be able to connect with people that have that shared lived experience, like Adam said. I also have been on Smart Patients for years. I haven't been as active lately as I used to be. But, for me, I think what's so nice about communities like Smart Patients is because you are able to connect with patients who have been through the types of treatments, right, that we all have been through. It's different with patients of other cancer types a lot of times, right? We're not going through the same treatment side effects and all those things. And you're able to connect and relate to people on a level that, even the most well-meaning people in my life who love me dearly have not walked that path with me and can't understand some of those things. I remember whenever I was interviewing to be on the SWAG patient committee, they asked me, they said, "Well, Laura, you're in your 30s. Are you going to be able to connect with patients that are in their 60s and 70s and 80s?" I said, "I already do." I already do, because of communities like Smart Patients, and it's great. And it's some of the most meaningful people in my life I've met through support groups like Smart Patients.
And so it sounds like, and I think this isn't my own idea, but I've heard that, people will often access online support as for either informational support, just, this is my situation, what do I do next? Very practical advice, or I've been recommended to take cabozantinib, what should I expect? And then also for emotional support. So, boy, this has been brutal. I'm really worried. My wife is really having a hard time. Anyone have any ideas about what what to do, or just for emotional support. So it sounds like elements of both of those you've each received from that community. It's not just one or the other. It can be a blend, and maybe it evolves over time depending on what's going on in the situation.
And I'll make just two very quick additional points. One is, that people do come and go on that site in a positive way, in a way that's, or at least neutral. It's a site that's there for you when you need it, and a community that's there for you when you need it. It doesn't ask anything of you, right? And that's a very valuable thing. And it's different also, I would say, as a psychiatrist, I'm a big proponent of people having professional help, of people being in group therapy in real life, having a professional, help in various ways. This is not that. This is a different thing that's very unique and has unique strengths and also unique limitations. Some people that I feel very close to, I have no idea what they even look like. It's we've never met. We'll probably never will meet, and it's dynamic in all kinds of ways and really valuable.
Great.
Oh, the last second thing I wanted to mention is it's not just for patients. So there are a lot of folks on the site. Susan, who introduced our talk today, was a caregiver for her beloved husband, and it's a site for anyone who's really touched by this disease.
Yeah, I think just to add what Adam said, you can also be what's called a lurker. A lot of people don't want to be out having a public face in this, and you can go there and find information and be anonymous.
I have a question about maybe more formal support. So, this may be a somewhat personal question, but I'll put it out there. Feel free to abstain. But is there any point in your cancer diagnosis and treatment journey where you felt like you really needed something more formal? So Adam mentioned, seeking out formal social work help or counseling, or trying to get that for a loved one who was really struggling. And what were the cues that maybe suggested that was the right thing to do? And how did the formal type of support differ from all the other kind of informal supports that we've talked about?
I don't mind taking this one, and not to dominate, but I'll jump in on this. So I did have to kind of seek it out. I think this is an area that, and it's well-meaning, but unfortunately sometimes care providers maybe feel a little bit uncomfortable talking about the emotional and social aspects of a cancer diagnosis. So my oncologist, who unfortunately has since passed away, did an amazing job of checking in on me on a human level too, especially in the beginning, and saying, what do you need? Encourage me to go to counseling and to therapy. I'm really grateful for that. Fortunately, I had the tools to find those options myself, but it would have been great if there would have been someone in the clinic, like a social worker, who could have said, hey, Laura, here's a list of providers in the area or something like that, right? But luckily I already had those resources, and so I did. But I'll be really honest, I was seeing 2 therapists at the same time for about probably a 2-month or 3-month stretch there. I was like, you know what? I'm on medical leave. I don't have anything else to do. My kids are back in school. I'm gonna get my butt to therapy. And that's what I did. And so I literally was seeing 2 different therapists twice a week for a while. I have no shame in saying that. It was a hard period in my life. And I think that if somebody can get through a cancer diagnosis, especially advanced cancer diagnosis, without therapy, hats off to you, but that was not for me. And so it was incredibly helpful, not because it was somebody that I could talk to about, treatment options, or, maybe even how I was feeling physically, but just being able to talk to someone about, I was worried about my husband and my kids. I was worried about, how I would be able to handle going back to work, if I should even go back to work. And, I remember one of the therapists I had at the time was kind of gave me a lot of tough love, which I'm not even sure now that I really appreciate it, but gave me, some quotes and some books to read. And that was really impactful for me, and helped me kind of find my footing again, being comfortable after such an earth-shattering diagnosis.
Very interesting. Adam or Brian, anything you'd like to add on that? No pressure, but I'm not sure if that made you feel like adding anything else.
I just want to add that it, professional mental health care, one of the real benefits of it is that it's a unidirectional relationship, right? So when you share emotional burdens with your loved ones, they're your loved ones, and so they understand the deal, and they're there for you, and you're there for them, and that's how that goes in the best of circumstances. Professional mental health care, like therapy, like going to a social worker, psychiatrist, whatever it may be, the understanding is they're going to leave their stuff at the door, and they're not going to be burdened by your emotional weight, right? And that's very freeing. It's a space where you can actually say what you're really thinking without worrying, am I going to hurt this person's feelings, or how should I frame this? How are they going to respond to this? You might still have those thoughts and concerns about your therapist, but a good therapist will put that aside for you.
As a follow-up, is there any piece of advice or way of thinking about your medical situation that your care teams have shared with you that you found to be very helpful? Or on the contrary, was there any way that anyone framed information that made you feel, well, I really wish that was, in retrospect, that was not good advice, and I would, recommend they not do that? Just thinking about particularly for our panelists, all in periods of, I don't really know what to call it, equilibrium or NED or not, with rapidly dynamic cancer, but, maybe for lack of a better word, some would say maybe living in kind of this limbo period where I hope that continues for many, many years, but we don't know. In terms of thinking about that, has anyone's, could be a physician or a social worker or a therapist, kind of help provide any useful advice about how to approach that kind of cognitively?
I can jump in here for a second. I had one of the NIH doctors tell me something I thought was pretty fun, which was, he said to me, Brian, we're in the practice of medicine. The emphasis is on practice. And he said, what we're doing right now is we're buying you time. And so, you have to think of it in terms of, it's not a perfect world out there. You have to engage and, be your own advocate quite a bit through this process, if not every day. But I just want to highlight what Adam said there about support, and Laura too. I think for me, it was my spouse, my wife, Marisa, who was a rock at times. And but I found that she wanted to talk about it. She was anxious, of course, little kids. And I didn't want to talk about it. It's like, the cancer guy's not in right now. I want to be the Brian guy. But she needed to. And so, when you're going through this, I think you got to remember those caregivers out there, they're sacrificing everything as well. And you've got to, meet them and be understanding.
That's a great point, Brian.
Let's see. The next one I had, where did it go? I just wrote it down. Oh, I have a question about goals and thinking about the future. So the title of this is kind of making the most of more time. I'm just curious how you approach from where you are now, thinking about goals and wishes and things, in the years ahead. What does that look like for you? Is that something that feels scary? Is it something that feels more comfortable? I'm just curious how that works, and it might be very well be different for each of you. So maybe I'll start with Laura on that one.
I think that changes for me. Honestly, I just remember whenever I was sitting in at UCLA where I had my nephrectomy, I was sitting in ICU, and I remember looking out the window and going, "Oh my God, I'm probably going to die, and I haven't even done all the traveling I want to do yet." And so whenever I got better, relatively speaking, right, whenever I was at a point where I, wasn't in the hospital anymore, I did go ahead and, start, okay, I'm going to start traveling again. I'm going to start doing these things. And so now, if there's something I want to do, I try my best to do it, take time off work when I need to, rearrange schedules when I need to in order to do it. For me, a huge goal was seeing my daughters graduate from high school. And, so because it's something I didn't think I was going to be able to see. And so whenever my oldest graduated in 2021, it was just huge for me because I felt like, okay, I made it this long to see her, become an adult, or at least a legal adult. I don't know if I'm ready to call her an adult yet, just because I'm protective, um, but I think just setting those goals is hugely important, and being okay with knowing that it may change. And I think also allowing yourself to have just normal days sometimes too. Sometimes a good day for me is just I just want to lay on my couch and watch bad reality TV and read a book. And I think it's okay to take that pressure off of yourself, thinking every day has to be a great day and a perfect day, and I have to go do all the things today. Like sometimes just existing and being happy is a good day. Take the win when you can.
Adam or Brian, any other thoughts there?
I just a real quick one, which is, I think, for me, time has become such a central theme of my life. How much time do you have? And I think it becomes acute, when this happens. So I think in terms of chunks of time, sometimes like Laura's saying, it's the next hour, like it was this past hour. I got to get through this next hour, but then, it's like next week, next month, next couple of years. And then you start putting, markers out like children's birthdays and your own birth, your cancerversary, whatever it is. So, I think there's, a lot there to be looking forward and, set those, markers out there, because once you get there, you can celebrate. I mean, just keep doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got two versions that I try to employ. One is very concrete milestones, and I never would have predicted that I would do this, but I keep it on a list on my phone, on a task, to-do list. And it's like shocking how much of that list you can, every time you knock one off, you and I'm not talking about a bucket list. I'm talking about like, seeing my son go to kindergarten. That's not something I always wanted to do my whole life, but it's something that I'm so glad I got to do. So I have that very concrete, lots for years out, and who knows how many I'll get to, but I can't wait to try. And then the other is I try to do a little bit of time machine work. So and I do something that I never did before the diagnosis, which is every night, as best I can, I write down a couple of things, anything I can think of, up to 3 items, things that I'm grateful for that happened that day. Really minor things. They can be nothing. Sometimes I put them in parentheses if they're actually not great things, they're bad things, but I want to make note of them, so that a year, 2 years from now, I look back at that date. It's a 5-year calendar, so every day has 5 years on it. Anyway, so I practice gratitude in that way, where I think, hey, that good thing happened. I wasn't even expecting it, but I was there for it. I was ready for it when it came, and now I'm appreciative that it happened. I don't know why, but that's very helpful for me.
Yeah, and I think just to riff a little bit on that, Adam, it's a little spin on it, but post-diagnosis, there are times in your life, more times in my life at least, where I'm like, you know what? I'm going for that because, I faced some pretty bad stuff. What do I have to lose? It drives my kids crazy. They think I'm like this eccentric old guy, boomer that goes out and talks to people. But hey, I think you got to take advantage. You got to take advantage of this when you can.
So interesting in the last several comments. I'm going to be thinking about those for a while. I wrote something down when Laura was speaking, being okay with knowing that things might change, but not necessarily making that a barrier to identifying goals, right? And I double circled that because I think it feels scary. I can imagine I'm not a patient, I'm not in this situation, but I can imagine that it would feel scary to set a goal and then have something happen that made that not achievable. but if you don't make it a goal, and maybe it could have been achieved. I don't know. Just I think the flexibility, the way you framed it, Laura, was wonderful about, this might change, but this is my goal now, and this seems like it's in play, and I'm going to go for it. And then that riffed in with what Brian said about just kind of going for it, and a lot of what Adam said. I thought that the kind of writing down the gratitudes or even the annoyances, if it was something that wanted to be seen, I thought was wonderful. There is a question from the audience that I wanted to get to, because I'm interested in if we can give some advice here. So there is a caregiver who wrote in a question. It seems like the caregiver is struggling some with the weight of feeling like needing to provide a lot of care and support for the patient who's going through the cancer diagnosis, and is worried about exhibiting vulnerability. If the caregiver seeks out help or seeks out a therapist, that might kind of signify weakness, or that they're not doing well, and worried about the impact that could have on the patient. So I'm curious if anyone has any advice. Obviously, this is applying to a caregiver, but from the patient's perspective, what advice you might give a caregiver experiencing this situation.
I can try to take a stab at this. I actually was a caregiver for my mom, who was diagnosed with kidney cancer about 2 years after my own diagnosis. 0 out of 10 do not recommend being diagnosed with cancer and also having to help a parent through cancer. As you can tell, humor is my terrible coping strategy. But I would say, I think I can relate to this question because my mom and I had very different perspectives on, our own cancer diagnoses, and she had a tendency to be more positive than I was, and didn't always want to talk about the nitty gritty and the dirty stuff. And so I would just say, you're not alone. For one, this is something that is actually relatively common in the caregiver community. I would say if you think that your spouse is open to having a conversation and framing it as, you will be helping me if I can look out for resources that will be helpful to help you, right? So help me help you. I think that's oftentimes a great way to frame that conversation, where it's, saying, look, I want to be a better caregiver for you, and the only way for me to do that is to find resources that can benefit me. And I hate to say it, but if that's not an option, or if it's just something that your spouse is not comfortable with, the nice thing about COVID is now there's a lot more online options for support. So I know telehealth is still relatively frequent within the therapy community. And then there's other options too, like joining Smart Patients. There's a lot of caregivers with Smart Patients. And you can find a lot of support there as well. But please don't try to keep rowing down the river alone, because you don't have to.
And I would just add, that of course I don't know anything about the specifics of this situation, so I'm just going to comment broadly that people are not particularly adept at hiding intense emotions when they're going through them, and so I would hope that most loved ones will support you in helping yourself feel better, and that very few people will be surprised if you disclose, I've been having a tough time. They probably have seen signs of that around, because people are very perceptive especially when their loved ones aren't doing well, and it might be coming out in ways that you may or may not even realize. Just my 2 cents.
Wonderful. Well, we're nearing the end of the hour. I can't remember an hour that's gone by faster for me recently. This was really wonderful. I want to kind of begin concluding the hour, and then invite you all, in case I forget, to join the social event that's happening following this. And there's a link in the chat about that. I want to thank our panelists. I've learned a tremendous amount from hearing from Adam, Laura, and Brian and their experiences. Some very practical tips that I wrote down that hopefully I'll be able to share with patients in clinic later this week. But also really just commend the panelists for opening up about not necessarily easy things to talk about. doing it on a Zoom call that's being recorded. So I think it really, this whole program is really the panelists, and it's been really a privilege to moderate and ask a few questions, but I've learned a tremendous amount and would like to thank KidneyCAN for putting this on. I think this is a little different than the average, what's next in kidney cancer treatment, which is also super important, but this fills a different role and also really important, as we've heard from our stories and panelists. So thank you all for attending, and to the panelists for sharing. It's really been a privilege to be a part of this.
And
Thanks.
thank you, Evan. And thanks to all of the panelists. That was really an amazing presentation. It exceeded our expectations and hopes. I think it was wonderful. I want to thank our sponsors, BMS, ASI, Exelexis, and Genentech, and Merck, who enable us to get together and do these wonderful programs. For those of you who only saw part of this or want to share it with a family member, it's going to be available on YouTube by the end of the week. You'll get an email from KidneyCAN with a video link and other resources shared tonight. Our next town hall will be October 10th on the topic of maintaining kidney function. And we're all going to just get together, say hi, introduce ourselves at the community social following the town hall. The link is in your chat box, I believe. And thank you all again. Look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye-bye.